Test 2.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a financial counselor.
Hi there, how can I help you today?
Hi, I came to talk to you about a problem I'm having. Is this visit confidential? It's sort of embarrassing.
Of course it's confidential. That is university policy concerning all counselors. Nothing you say to me here will leave this office.
Oh, good. Well, my problem is, I don't have any money. I don't even have enough to buy a pack of instant noodles. I'm dead broke.
Oh, I see. Well, that is a problem. But it's not so bad. Let's talk about the source of your problem. First of all, when do you get money? Where does it come from?
Oh, yeah, my parents send me an allowance. They send me $400 each month. But it's never enough. I always manage to spend it in the first week or two.
Sure, I hear this problem all the time. You know, there are a lot of students here whose parents give them no money. Some of them have to work 2 jobs plus attend classes just to get by.
Yeah, well, I'm a microbiology major, so I study too much to have even one part-time job. There's just no way I can balance the two.
Okay, I understand that you need your time to study. Microbiology is not easy. So let's go back to your $400 allowance and see if we can figure out some creative budgeting solutions. $400, that equals $100 a week. So in a given week, what are you spending your money on?
Well, I stop and have a coffee at Starbucks every morning and then...
Wait a minute. You have a coffee at Starbucks every morning, 7 days a week?
No, I don't usually make it on weekends.
Okay, even 5 days a week. A coffee at Starbucks costs at least $3.
Try 4. The prices went up recently.
Okay, $4 a day, 5 days a week. That means that 20% of your overall weekly budget is going to coffee in the morning.
Okay, I hadn't really thought about that. It's just coffee after all.
Yeah, but it really adds up. Try going over to McDonald's where a cup of coffee is only $1. Or better yet, buy some coffee at the grocery store or just drink water. How about your other expenses?
Well, then there's lunch, which I usually have at a pub or get fast food.
There you go again with eating out. Do you have a card for the cafeteria?
Yeah, but the food there is terrible. I probably spend about $10 a day on lunch.
Okay, well, why don't you start buying some cheap groceries and making your lunch at home? You could save at least $8 a day, which would add up to $40 per week. Between your lunches and coffee, we're up to about 60% of your weekly budget.
And then there's a pack of cigarettes a day.
Cigarettes? Those cost at least $5 a pack. You have to quit smoking or get a job. I would recommend quitting altogether. That's an expensive habit.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I could cut down at least.
Well, it's obvious to me that you have a consumption problem. You consume too much and much more than you need. If you want to survive on this budget, start eating at home, cut down on the smoking and other luxuries, and try to do fun activities that are free, like going to the library or campus events, and go to the park instead of a pub, where you won't be paying $5 or $10 an hour just to sit there.
I'm going to try all of these solutions. Thanks.
No problem. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.
1. What problem does the student have? 2. Why does the student visit the financial counselor? 3. According to the financial counselor, what is one way that the student can save money? 4. What can be inferred about the student? 5. What will the student probably do next? Listen to a lecture in a zoology class.
Okay, class, today we are going to talk all about badgers. We're going to discuss their natural habitats, their feeding habits, their families, and most interestingly, their coloration. So, to get started, what can you tell me about badgers' habits and habitats?
They are nocturnal creatures that hunt at night, usually by digging. They are also carnivores and feed on several species of insects and small mammals. They live in marshlands across North America and the UK. They're great tunnel diggers and they hibernate through the winter.
Very good. Except contrary to popular belief, it has been proven that badgers do not hibernate. But they do have adaptations that allow them to survive on less food during the hard winter months when their regular diet of earthworms and grubs is in shorter supply.
Aha, I see. They're adapted for leaner winter months.
That's correct. Badgers live in underground tunnel networks called sets. Sets are usually found on sloping ground where there is some cover. They dig these with their incredibly strong front claws. They live in groups of about 15 and are led by a dominant male and female. These sets usually have one or two main entrances and several lesser-used entryways. Now, who else can tell me something about the badger?
Males are called, I think, boars.
That's right, and what about the females?
They're called, sows.
Yes, boars and sows. Now, the males are tough. They are also very territorial and are known to patrol their sets constantly, especially during mating season. Let's talk about badger mating.
Isn't their method a little different from that of most animals?
Yes, they reproduce through delayed implantation. They can mate at any time of year, but the embryo does not implant into the womb and start growing until winter. This means that all cubs are born around the same time of year, between January to March. Litter sizes range from 1 to 5 cubs, but usually average about 3.
Huh, they are so cute when they're born.
Sure, they're blind and pink with white silky fur. They suckle for about 8 weeks and once they have sufficient fat reserves, begin to achieve independence from their mother, which doesn't fully occur until their 15th week. Now, let's talk about the badger's coloration. What can you tell me about that?
Well, they've got those black and white stripes on their heads and faces. I'm not sure why, though.
That's a good point. Why do they have those strange sharp lines of color on their heads? Is it just the randomness of nature that they have those markings?
Wouldn't it have something to do with an adaptation to disguise them?
Close, but not exactly. You could definitely say that those markings are an adaptation, but not to disguise them from predators. Instead, they are a warning to any animal that might want to mess with a badger. Those sharp black and white stripes are one of nature's ways of saying, "Stay back, don't mess with me." And you can see similar color markings on other animals that have them as a warning, such as certain snakes, the skunk, and even some insects.
Aha, so those markings are like a danger sign.
Exactly. Danger! Do not touch me! But remember, not all badgers are lucky enough to have this built-in defense system. It all depends on the amount of melanin pigmentation in the badger's skin and fur. That is the genetic chemical which decides whether the badger has the warning stripes on its head, or if it's an albino, or black, or even ginger-colored. So, that's all for today. Don't forget to study your notes for next week's quiz.
6. What is the lecture mainly about? 7. What does the professor explain about melanin pigmentation? 8. According to the professor, what is the purpose of the markings on a badger's head? 9. What is the professor's attitude towards the female student's description of badger habits and habitats? 10. How does the professor organize the information about badgers that he presents to the class? 11. According to the lecture, which of the following are facts about the badger? Check the correct answer in the box below. Listen to a lecture in a psychology class.
All right, everybody. I suggest you turn on your voice recorders now. I'm going to give you an overview on the topic of attachment theory, which covers the way we establish bonds with our caregivers when we're babies and how that continues into our adolescent and adult life. This theory is especially important when exploring psychology since it affects each and every one of us at such a core level of our personalities. Now, the basis of attachment theory hinges on what psychologists call an affectional bond. This is a type of attachment behavior an individual has for another individual. This bond is most typically held between a mother and her child. In this type of bond, the mother and child are partners, and they tend to remain within proximity of one another. The term was developed by psychologist John Bowlby, who published an important paper in 1958 entitled The Nature of the Child's Tie to His Mother. According to Bowlby, there are 5 main criteria that must be present for an affectional bond to be established, and a 6th for it to last. The first of the main criteria is that an affectional bond is persistent rather than transitory. This means that it lasts. It doesn't come and go like less meaningful relationships. The second criterion is an affectional bond involves one particular person. The person cannot be interchanged or replaced with anybody else. The third is that the affectional bond involves a relationship that is emotionally significant. And the fourth criterion is that the individual who has established the bond wants to remain physically close or within proximity of the person with whom he is bonded. Fifth and last of the main criteria is that the individual will become saddened or distressed if he is involuntarily separated from the person to whom he is bonded. Does this remind you of being a kid with your mom? Okay, moving along. After the 5 main criteria, it's important to tack on this extra 6th one, which is a characteristic of a true attachment bond. This is that the person who's formed the bond will always seek security and comfort in the relationship. Now, the other important paper that was published in 1958 was by HuyHuu. It was entitled The Nature of Love. This seminal work was based on a series of groundbreaking experiments with infant rhesus monkeys. These experiments showed that the baby monkeys preferred an emotional attachment with the object of their affectional bond rather than life-sustaining food. In short, the experiment worked like this. The baby monkeys were separated from their mothers at birth. Then they were introduced to 2 surrogate mothers. The first mother was made of cold metal wire mesh. The second mother was the same mesh frame, but it was covered in soft cloth and foam. The cold metal mother also contained a bottle with milk, and the soft mother had nothing. What HuyHuu found was that the young monkeys would quickly drink the milk from the cold metal mother and then quickly seek contact with the soft mother, with whom they'd already formed affectional bonds. This study showed that babies ultimately desire their mother's warmth rather than their physical survival needs. But even the soft doll did not totally satisfy the baby monkey's needs. Later on, the baby monkeys that were raised apart from their natural mothers proved to be maladjusted to social situations with other monkeys. They acted abnormally when placed in these situations. In most cases, they were either very fearful of the other monkeys or responded with unprovoked aggression. Also, the female monkeys who were raised in isolation often abused and neglected their own infants when they too became mothers. These experiments were very important, especially since such long-running and deep-seated tests such as these could never be ethically performed on human beings. And as researchers have found in so many cases, these rhesus monkeys serve as excellent analogues to human beings, especially in the infantile stages. So, now that we've discussed Bowlby and HuyHuu's scientific contributions to establishing the field of attachment theory, let's call it a day. Tomorrow we'll cover the positives and negative aspects of affectional bonding.
12. What is the main topic of the lecture? 13. What does the professor explain Bowlby and HuyHuu's scientific work? 14. According to the professor, what is true about rhesus monkeys? 15. What is the professor's opinion of the HuyHuu experiments? 16. What can be inferred about rhesus monkeys? 17. According to the lecture, which of the following are features of an affectional bond? Check the correct answers in the box below. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hello, Mr. Adams. May I speak with you for a moment?
Mary, sure. Come into my office and have a seat. How can I help you today?
Well, I'm here to talk to you about our group project in your intro class.
Okay, yes, the group projects that are due next week. How is your group faring?
Well, not so well. That's what I was hoping to discuss with you. We met last night and failed to make any progress. We just kind of sat there, with nobody saying much.
So the first thing I want to know is, who did the group elect as a leader? I'm assuming it was you, since you're the one who is here representing them now?
No, we just kind of avoided selecting a leader. It was like nobody wanted to step up and take the responsibility.
Aha, I see. Nobody wanted to assume the leadership role and therefore no productive decisions were made.
That's right. We couldn't really decide on what topic to choose for our research project, or even how we should go about choosing a subject.
Well, Mary, I think the correct decision is sitting there right under your nose. It's you. You should elect yourself leader of this quiet little group and start making decisions to get something accomplished.
Yes, but being the leader takes so much effort. With my other studies, I just don't know if I have the time and energy to invest in this.
Do you want a good grade?
Of course.
Well, if you're willing to invest the time and effort into coming to see me here and you really want a good grade, I think it's in your best interest to assume leadership of this group and to start making some strong decisions.
Okay. Tell me more.
Well, the benefits are trifold. First of all, you'll steer your group toward success. This will give you the respect and admiration of your fellow students. Secondly, by asserting yourself, there will be some long-term benefits in the boost of confidence and ability you'll receive.
Sure. I'll feel stronger, sharper, more capable.
That's right, you've got it. By stepping up into the leader's role, you'll play a role that is required in any human endeavor. And thirdly, you'll impress me, your teacher, which means you'll get a better grade than the other students who were too meek to do anything for themselves.
Okay, I think you've talked me into it. I'm going to call another group meeting and nominate myself as group leader.
Sure, that's right. But don't assume all of the burden yourself. As soon as you're the leader, you need to allocate the responsibilities. Make one of the group members in charge of researching the various topics and another member in charge of assembling information. Before you know it, your group will be working towards its goal like a well-oiled machine.
Oh, Professor, thanks so much for your valuable guidance.
No problem. That's what I'm here for. 18. What problem does the student have? 19. Why does the student visit the professor? 20. According to the professor, how many benefits are there for Mary to become group leader? 21. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question. Aha, I see. Nobody wanted to assume the leadership role and therefore no productive decisions were made.
That's right. We couldn't really decide on what topic to choose for our research project, or even how we should go about choosing a subject.
Well, Mary, I think the correct decision is sitting there right under your nose. What does the professor mean when he says this? I think the correct decision is sitting there right under your nose. 22. What will the student probably do next? Listen to part of a lecture in a history class.
Okay, class, today we're going to chat about the timber crisis that began in ancient Sumeria during the Bronze Age. Once copper smelting developed from pottery making, the use of wood fuel accelerated. By the time the Bronze Age was well underway, wood was being consumed around the eastern Mediterranean on a scale that could not possibly be sustained on a long-term basis. So, who can tell me why these guys needed so much wood?
They would have needed it for mining, smelting, metalworking, shipbuilding, pottery making, and construction industries. They all had massive appetites for fuel, and almost all domestic fuel was also wood.
Very good. That's exactly right. As cities developed around the seasonally dry eastern Mediterranean, they had to build large cisterns for water supply. Most often their construction demanded large quantities of cement and plaster. Mediterranean private and public buildings all contained large quantities of cement, plaster, brick, and terracotta, all of which required far more wood for production than the equivalent amount used directly for construction. The effects on local fuel supplies would have been increasingly severe.
What about Egypt? It has almost no trees.
That's a good question. Egypt was trading with Byblos on the Lebanese coast for cedar for shipbuilding, temple construction, and furniture making as early as 3000 BC. But perhaps the most famous documentation of the shortage of wood around the ancient Mediterranean is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest epic poem that has survived. Gilgamesh was a Sumerian, the king of Uruk around 2700 to 2500 BC. He conquered Kish, Uruk's great rival city, thus gaining power over all of southern Mesopotamia. Apparently, the first epics about him were written in Sumerian around 2000 BC. We do not have the originals, but we have copies made by scribes in old Babylonian times for their libraries. They were separate stories, and the welding of these separate pieces into an epic was an Akkadian literary innovation, not a Sumerian one. This means that the central theme of the Gilgamesh epic may date to 1500 BC rather than Sumerian times, but it is still illuminating. I'm curious, has anybody here read the Epic of Gilgamesh?
I have. The Gilgamesh epic is totally about deforestation. Gilgamesh and his companion go off to cut down a cedar forest, braving the wrath of the forest god Humbaba, who has been entrusted with forest conservation.
Wow, I'm really impressed with all of you. You've really done your homework this time. It's interesting that Gilgamesh is cast as the hero, even though he has the typical logger mentality, cut it down and don't mind the consequences. The repercussions for Gilgamesh are severe. He loses his chance of immortality, for example. But the consequences for Sumeria were even worse. It's clear that the geography and climate of southern Mesopotamia would not provide the wood fuel to support a Bronze Age civilization that worked metal, built large cities, and constructed canals and ceremonial centers that used wood, plaster, and bricks. Most timber would have to be imported from the surrounding mountains, and deforestation there, in a climate that receives occasional torrential storms, would have led to severe erosion and runoff. The loss of Gilgamesh's immortality may be a literary reflection of the realization that Sumeria could not be sustained. Now, who can tell me what Theodore Wertheim, the foremost scholar of this period, said about the timber crisis?
Theodore Wertheim suggested that massive deforestation of the eastern Mediterranean began about 1200 BC. It was for construction, lime kilning, and ore smelting.
Right again. But it probably began earlier in the drier regions further east. King Hammurabi's laws from around 1750 BC carried the death penalty for the unauthorized felling of trees in Mesopotamia. The problem may have been even worse in intensive metalworking regions like Anatolia. Metal smelting and forging had been going on in Anatolia for at least 3,000 years by 1200 BC. So, I hope you got all of this in your notes. Now, let's look at how the timber crisis extended into ancient Greece and how it affected the Peloponnesian War.
23. What is the main topic of the lecture? 24. Why does the professor explain the Epic of Gilgamesh? 25. What resulted from the invention of the copper melting process? 26. What can be inferred about the male student? 27. What can be inferred about the Sumerian timber crisis? 28. According to the lecture, which of the following were uses for wood during the Bronze Age? Check the correct answers in the box below. Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Now let's talk a little more in depth about the lens. The crystalline lens is a transparent, biconvex structure in the eye that, along with the cornea, helps to refract light to focus on the retina. Its function is thus similar to a man-made optical lens. Are you following me? So, during the fetal stage, the development of the lens is aided by the hyaloid artery. In adults, the lens depends entirely upon the aqueous and vitreous humors for nourishment. Some of the most important characteristics of the lens are that it is non-renewable and transparent and has no blood vessel and no organelles. In humans, the refractive power of the lens in its natural environment is approximately 15 diopters, roughly 1/4 of the eye's total power. The lens is made of transparent proteins called crystallins. The average concentration of lens proteins is about twice that of other intracellular proteins and is thought to play a structural role in the lens. It is about 5 millimeters thick and has a diameter of about 9 millimeters for an adult human, but these figures can vary. The proteins are arranged in approximately 20,000 thin concentric layers, with a refractive index varying from approximately 1.406 in the central layers down to 1.386 in the less dense cortex of the lens. This index gradient enhances the optical power of the lens. The lens is included in the capsular bag maintained by the zonules of Zinn. It is composed of fibers that come from hormone-producing cells. In fact, the cytoplasm of these cells makes up the transparent substance of the lens. The crystalline lens is composed of 4 layers from the surface to the center. They are the capsule, the subcapsular epithelium, the cortex, and the nucleus. The lens capsule is a clear, membrane-like structure that is quite elastic, a quality that keeps it under constant tension. As a result, the lens naturally tends towards a rounder or more globular configuration, a shape it must assume for the eye to focus at a near distance. Slender but very strong suspensor ligaments, also known as zonules, which attach at one end to the lens capsule and at the other end to the ciliary processes of the circular ciliary body around the inside of the eye, hold the lens in place. When the eye is viewing an object at a far distance so that the parallel rays of light are entering the eye, the ciliary muscle within the ciliary body relaxes. The ciliary processes pull on the zonules, which in turn pull on the lens capsule around its equator. This causes the entire lens to flatten or to become less convex, enabling the lens to attempt to focus light from the faraway object. Conversely, when the ciliary muscle works or contracts, tension is released on the suspensor ligaments and subsequently on the lens capsule, causing both lens surfaces to become more convex and the eye to be able to focus on near objects. Okay, so the lens is flexible and its curvature is controlled by ciliary muscles through the zonules. By changing the curvature of the lens, one can focus the eye on objects at different distances from it. This process is called accommodation. You need to pay close attention here because it is most important to understand how the lens ages. The lens continually grows throughout life, laying new cells over the old cells, resulting in a stiffer lens. The lens gradually loses its accommodation ability as the individual ages. The loss of the individual's focusing ability is termed by presbyopia. It's really important that you become very familiar with the principles of the accommodative process, since much of your future work in the field of optics will consist of helping your patients adapt to changes in their own accommodative process over time. Okay? Normally, the accommodative process of the crystalline lens is smooth and effortless. When one changes one's focus from far to near, the ciliary muscle quickly contracts, causing the crystalline lens to accommodate become thicker and the object at a near distance to become clear. Then, when looking back again at a far distance, the ciliary muscle immediately relaxes, causing the crystalline lens to revert to a thin shape and one's far distance vision to become clear again. Now, I know I just hit you with a mouthful, but I hope you've got it covered in your notes because your final exam is coming up next week. Don't be afraid to come to my office in case you want to ask any questions, or feel free to drop me an email.
29. What aspect of the eye does the professor mainly discuss? 30. What does the professor explain the process of accommodation? 31. How does the index gradient affect the optical power of the lens? 32. According to the lecture, which of the following are layers of the crystalline lens? Check the correct answers in the box below. "33. How does the professor organize the information he presents to the class? "34. Why does the professor feel it is important for the students fully to understand the process of accommodation?